I only meant for her to read it, but somehow the dead stayed silent, and the living answered instead. I never planned to write again. Not after the funeral, not after the casseroles stopped showing up, not after the phone went quiet. But the silence was worse than the grief. So that night, when the rain drummed against the roof like it was keeping time with my heart, I sat at the kitchen table and picked up a pen. The apartment smelled faintly of crayons and burnt coffee. Lily's drawings were taped all over the fridge, little stick-figure families where her mother still smiled with bright yellow hair. My daughter slept in the next room, one small leg kicked free of the blanket, the teddy bear pressed to her chest. She was 6, but she already dreamed like someone much older. I wrote to Emily because talking to her felt like breathing again. The world had moved on without her, but my life still circled around the space she'd left. So I wrote what I could never say out loud. That I hated God a little. That I didn't know how to braid Lily's hair the way she liked it. That sometimes I caught myself setting an extra plate at dinner before remembering why the table felt so big. It wasn't poetry. It was survival on paper. Every word was a heartbeat I didn't want to lose. When I finished, the clock read past 2 a.m. The letter wasn't long, but it felt heavier than anything I'd ever held. I folded it carefully, like something alive might break inside, and slipped it into a plain white envelope. Across the front I wrote just one word, Emily. No address, no stamp. Because where do you mail grief? Sunday morning brought sunlight and guilt. Lily asked if we could visit Mommy's tree. She meant the old maple in the Riverside Park, the one where Emily used to read while Lily played in the grass. We'd gone there every week when she was alive. Now it was the only place that didn't make me feel trapped in my own house. The park smelled of wet leaves and the first hint of autumn. I carried the envelope in my jacket pocket, telling myself I'd throw it away before Lily noticed. But when we reached the bench, the wind slowed, and the world went quiet in that reverent way that makes you believe someone's listening. I set the letter on the bench, under the small brass plaque that read, "In loving memory of Emily Grace Walker." Lily looked up. "Is that for Mommy?" I nodded. "It's just a message she forgot to get." Her smile was small and serious. "Then the angels will take it." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe anything. We stayed until the sun dipped low, the sky turning the same color as her mother's favorite scarf. When Lily tugged my sleeve to go home, I glanced back one last time. The envelope lay still beneath the plaque, the corners fluttering softly in the breeze, like it was breathing. That night, for the first time in months, I slept. The next morning, Lily woke me with excitement. "Daddy, let's go see if Mommy got it." I smiled at her innocence, though my chest tightened. We drove back to the park, her humming some off-key tune in the back seat. The bench looked the same, except empty. The envelope was gone. At first I thought the wind had claimed it. I searched the grass, the path, even the trash cans. Nothing, not a shred of paper. "Maybe Mommy took it," Lily said, clapping her hands. "See? I told you angels deliver mail." I forced a smile, but my throat felt dry. Yeah, maybe she did. But deep down I knew the truth. Someone had found it. Someone had read it. And in that moment, an unexpected shame burned through me. That letter wasn't meant for eyes that still blinked or hearts that still beat. It was mine, raw and unedited, full of every weakness I'd hidden behind small talk and fake smiles. All day I couldn't shake the feeling of being exposed. Every knock at the door, every phone ring made me tense. What if a stranger recognized my name, laughed at my pain, shared it online? The world feeds on heartbreak like it's entertainment. That night the rain returned. I sat at the window, staring out at the streetlights bending in puddles, and whispered into the dark, "If you found it, please, just give it back." The silence answered. 2 days passed. Then 3. I tried convincing myself to forget it, but every time I walked past the mailbox, I half expected that envelope to be there again. Proof that grief had a return address. It was Friday when something changed. I came home from the late shift, exhausted and half numb, to find an envelope on my doorstep. No postage, no name, no logo, just my address, written in unfamiliar handwriting that looked too careful to be random. For a moment I thought it might be another bill. Then I saw the ink, blue, not black, and the way the paper had been folded by hand. My stomach turned. I stepped inside, closed the door, and stood in the dim light of the hallway. Lily was asleep down the hall. The whole world felt suspended, waiting. The paper trembled in my hands as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet. No greeting, no signature. Just one line written in that same elegant blue ink. Your letter reached where it was meant to go. That was it. Nothing else. I read it again and again until the words blurred. My chest felt too tight to breathe. Who wrote this? How could they know? I hadn't told anyone about the letter. I hadn't even signed my name on it. The handwriting wasn't familiar, but something about it felt deliberate, like whoever wrote it wanted me to believe they knew her. I looked towards the window. The rain had stopped, but the air outside shimmered with that after-storm stillness, like the world was holding its breath. I should have felt relief. Instead, dread crawled up my spine. I folded the paper back into its envelope and turned it over in my hands. That's when I noticed something I'd missed. A faint, embossed crest on the back flap, barely visible under the light. 2 intertwined initials pressed into the paper in gold, H and R. It looked expensive, like stationery that didn't belong anywhere near a man who counted change before buying milk. I set it on the table and stared at it until the clock ticked past midnight. I told myself it was probably a prank, that someone had picked it up out of pity. But somewhere deep inside, a colder thought whispered, what if it wasn't a stranger at all? What if this was the beginning of something Emily never told me about? I closed my eyes, and for the first time since she died, I wasn't sure if I wanted the truth. The letter I wrote to my wife was meant for the dead, but it was the living who answered, and they knew her name. When a billionaire's assistant showed up at my door, I thought it was a prank, until she said my wife's name. 3 days passed before anyone knocked on my door again. By then, I'd convinced myself that the letter had been a cruel trick. Maybe someone found it, wanted a laugh, and decided to mess with the grieving widower down the hall. That's the kind of thing people did these days. Curiosity was entertainment, and pain made good content. So when I heard the knock, I ignored it at first. Lily was coloring on the floor with a box of broken crayons, humming the same lullaby her mother used to sing. The rhythm of the knock was polite, deliberate, not like the impatient tapping of a delivery driver. The kind that said, I'm not leaving until you open. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door. The woman standing there didn't belong in my world. Not even close. She was tall, perfectly dressed in a dark tailored suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. A folder rested in her hand. Her nails painted the same cold silver as the car idling behind her. Mr. Walker, she asked, voice calm, crisp, professional, but with the kind of control that comes from money. Yes, I said slowly, already uneasy. She gave a small nod, the type that suggested she'd been trained to hide emotion. I'm sorry for the intrusion. My name is Claire Donovan. I work for Mr. Harrison Reed. The name meant nothing to me at first, though it carried the kind of weight that people used in headlines and annual reports. I'm afraid you have the wrong address, I said, already starting to close the door. But she spoke again, and her words froze me in place. It's about a letter, she said. A letter you wrote to your late wife, Emily Grace Walker. My throat went dry. The room behind me suddenly felt smaller. I stepped back without realizing it, the door hanging open like a wound. Who are you? I whispered. Claire's expression softened just slightly, enough to suggest she'd rehearsed this moment. Mr. Reed received your letter by accident. It was delivered to his private residence last week. That's impossible, I said. There was no address, no stamp. I left it in a park. I understand. Her tone was gentle now, like she'd said the same line to grieving people before. But the fact remains, he read it, and he asked me to find you. I stared at her, trying to decide if this was real. Behind her, the car's tinted window caught the light, reflecting my confused face back at me. Why? She hesitated. Because your words moved him, Mr. Walker. Deeply. I laughed then, not because it was funny, but because disbelief was easier than fear. You expect me to believe a billionaire just happened to find a random letter to my dead wife? She didn't flinch. I'm not asking you to believe it. I'm only asking you to come with me. Mr. Reed would like to meet you personally. The name echoed again. Harrison Reed. I'd heard it before somewhere. A business article, maybe. Real estate, technology, philanthropy. One of those men whose face people print on magazine covers and call visionary. A man who didn't belong anywhere near a life like mine. I looked past her to the sleek, black car waiting at the curb. Its windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see inside, but something about it felt heavy. Like it wasn't just a car, but a line between two worlds. I'm sorry, I said quietly. I think there's been a mistake. That letter wasn't meant to be found. She nodded once, as if expecting that answer. That's exactly why he wants to speak with you. Her calm unnerved me more than if she'd shouted. I folded my arms, a weak attempt at confidence. Look, I don't know what this is, but I'm not going anywhere with a stranger. Claire studied me for a moment, then reached into her folder and pulled out an envelope. He anticipated you might feel that way. She held it out carefully, the way someone might offer a fragile object. I hesitated before taking it. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind that belonged on a boardroom desk, not in my hands. My name was written on the front in gold-embossed ink. For a moment, I just stared at it, unwilling to touch something so foreign to my life. Please, she said softly. Read it. I opened the flap with shaky fingers. Inside was a single card, and written in the same gold ink were just a few words. Your wife once changed my life. It's time I returned the favor. The signature below it made my stomach turn. Harrison Reed. I looked up at Claire, who was watching me carefully. How does he know my wife's name? Her silence was answer enough. Behind her, the car door opened, smooth, soundless. A driver in a black suit stepped out, holding it open like a ritual. Mr. Reed is waiting, Claire said. He'd prefer not to discuss the details here. I looked down the hallway where Lily's laughter still echoed faintly from the living room. The part of me that was a father screamed no. The part that was a husband, or what was left of him, whispered, what if? The gold letters on the card caught the afternoon light. I imagined Emily's voice, soft, amused. Don't overthink it, love. You always do. I slipped the card back into its envelope and set it on the counter like it might burn me. Tell your boss, I said, that I'm not interested in whatever game this is. But Claire didn't move. She glanced toward Lily's drawings on the wall, then back at me. He said you'd say that, she murmured, and he asked me to leave you something else. She reached into her coat pocket and placed a small sealed envelope on the table beside the first one. The wax seal shimmered under the kitchen light. It wasn't gold this time. It was pale blue, the same shade as Emily's favorite sweater. Claire stepped back toward the door. He said you'd recognize it, she added quietly. I stared at the seal, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. My fingers shook as I picked it up. The wax was stamped with a single initial, E. How? But when I looked up, the door was already closing behind her. Through the window, I watched the car pull away, the taillights fading into the distance like the last glow of something unreal. For a long moment, I just stood there. Then I sat down at the table, the envelopes side by side like past and future staring at each other. I wanted to tear the blue one open, but my hand wouldn't move. The handwriting on the front was so painfully familiar, looping, gentle, confident. It was Emily's. That was impossible. The room spun as I tried to make sense of it. My wife had been gone for nearly 3 years. There was no way she could have written this. But the handwriting, it wasn't just similar. It was hers. The same curve on the E. The same tiny heart-shaped dot on the I of her name. I pressed the envelope against my chest like it might start beating again. Somewhere in the distance, a thunderstorm rolled across the city. The billionaire's invitation bore my wife's name in gold, but the envelope his assistant left behind was written by her hand. He lived in glass towers, but his eyes looked just as empty as mine. The city looked different from the back seat of that car. Through the tinted glass, everything shimmered like it belonged to another planet, one built of glass and silence. I'd spent most of my life working jobs that smelled of bleach and coffee. Men like Harrison Reed existed only on magazine covers near the checkout lines at the grocery store. Yet there I was, being driven into his world, clutching an envelope written in my dead wife's handwriting. The building loomed above me like a monument to the idea of success. 40 floors of polished steel and mirrored windows, reflecting a skyline that never looked back. Claire walked beside me through the marble lobby, her heels clicking softly, a rhythm that didn't match the pounding of my heart. Everything smelled of money. Clean, sharp, detached. When the elevator doors opened, the air changed. The top floor was quiet, too quiet. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of power. "Mr. Reed is waiting for you," Claire said, leading me through double doors into a room bathed in soft afternoon light. He stood by the window, looking out over the city as if it belonged to him. And maybe it did. Harrison Reed was younger than I'd expected. Early 40s, maybe. But the weight of years sat heavy on his shoulders. His suit was tailored perfection, but his posture carried fatigue. When he turned toward me, I saw it immediately. The emptiness I thought only grief could carve. "Mr. Walker," he said, extending a hand. His voice was calm, cultured, too measured for small talk. "Thank you for coming." I hesitated before shaking his hand. His grip was firm but not performative, like someone who'd learned the value of control the hard way. "I didn't exactly have a choice," I said quietly. A faint smile touched his lips, not unkind, but practiced. "I imagine this feels intrusive, a stranger reaching into something deeply personal." I nodded, still holding the envelope that had started it all. That letter wasn't supposed to reach anyone. He gestured toward a long glass table and motioned for me to sit. "Most things that matter aren't supposed to," he said. The view behind him stretched forever. Skyscrapers, river, sky, all framed like a painting of everything I didn't have. I sat across from him, the silence between us heavy enough to feel. "I read it," he said after a moment. "Every word." I swallowed hard. "Then you know more about me than you should." He leaned back, eyes unreadable. "I didn't read it out of curiosity. I read it because I recognized something in it. What could a man like you recognize in a man like me?" He exhaled slowly, gaze drifting toward the window again. "Loss. The kind that empties rooms long after the body's gone." The honesty in his tone caught me off guard. He wasn't bragging, wasn't pretending. For the first time, I saw through the layers of money and polish. Beneath it all, he was just another man who'd loved and lost, and was still standing only because he hadn't figured out how to fall. "I'm sorry," I said softly, unsure why. He nodded. "I lost my wife 5 years ago. It doesn't get easier. It just gets quieter." Something inside me loosened. For months, I'd been surrounded by people who avoided my grief, who told me to be strong or move on. But this stranger, this billionaire, spoke about loss like it was a language we both knew. We talked. Not about money or charity or the strange way my letter had found him, but about the things men rarely admit aloud. About how silence fills every corner of a house once laughter leaves it. About how children remember the small things. The smell of pancakes, the warmth of a hug, long after they forget the sound of a parent's voice. At one point, he opened a drawer and pulled out my letter. He'd kept it, unfolded, edges worn from being read too many times. Seeing it in his hands felt strange, intimate, wrong. But there was reverence in the way he held it. Your words— He paused, searching. They reminded me of her, of things I'd forgotten how to feel. I stared at the letter, my grief turned artifact, and whispered, "Then why call me here? To thank me for bleeding on paper?" He smiled faintly. "To tell you something I should have said years ago." My confusion must have shown, because he added, "I knew your wife." The words landed like a stone in my chest. "You what?" He nodded once. "Emily Grace Walker. I met her long before you did." I wanted to laugh it off, but his eyes didn't waver. They were steady, haunted, the kind that didn't lie. "She was a nurse," he continued, "at St. Mary's Hospital in Cedar Falls. I was 28, angry at the world, certain I was invincible. A car accident proved otherwise." The room seemed to tilt. My Emily had worked at St. Mary's before Lily was born. She'd told me stories about patients, faces she remembered, kindnesses she carried home. But never once had she mentioned a man named Harrison Reed. "She was assigned to my case," he said quietly. "I'd broken my leg, fractured ribs, nothing that should have changed a life. But she spoke to me like I mattered when I didn't. She used to bring in these terrible hospital muffins and make me eat breakfast even when I refused. She said it was the only way to heal, to start the day with something warm." A memory stirred. Emily laughing one morning, telling me that muffins could fix anything. I'd thought it was just one of her little sayings. "She didn't talk about herself much," he went on, "but she mentioned her dreams. A family, a little house, a daughter she'd name Lily." I couldn't breathe. He looked down, his voice faltering. "After I recovered, I sent flowers to the hospital, but she'd already left. I never saw her again. Not until your letter." I gripped the edge of the table. "You're telling me my wife saved your life?" He met my gaze, eyes glistening like someone holding back years of unshed truth. "Not just my life," he said softly. "My soul." Silence swallowed the room. The hum of the city below faded until all I could hear was the slow, steady beat of my own heart. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The light shifted, turning the glass walls golden, and I realized we were two broken men sitting in a room built for the living, but haunted by the dead. When he finally spoke again, his voice trembled just slightly, the sound of someone still trying to repay a debt that can't be measured. He leaned forward, eyes steady on mine, and said the words that would change everything. "Your wife once saved my life. How could my wife, a small-town nurse, have crossed paths with a man like him?" For a long time after he said it, I couldn't speak. The sentence hung in the air between us like smoke, filling every space it could until it was all I could breathe. "Your wife once saved my life." I'd replayed the sound of those words in my head 100 times, and they still didn't make sense. How do you know it was her?" I finally managed, though my voice sounded smaller than I felt. Harrison gave a faint, almost nostalgic smile. "I don't forget faces, Mr. Walker, and I could never forget hers." He walked toward a cabinet by the window, pulled out a crystal decanter, and poured himself a drink he didn't touch. "When I met Emily, I was a mess. My father had just died. I'd inherited an empire I didn't want, and a board full of men waiting for me to fail. I thought I was untouchable, until I wrapped my car around a tree doing 90 on a coastal road." I said nothing, watching as his reflection stared back at me through the glass walls. A man surrounded by everything, and yet looking like he owned nothing that mattered. "I woke up in the hospital with a metal rod in my leg and a heart full of anger. Every nurse treated me like a headline waiting to happen, except her." He smiled faintly. "Emily didn't care who I was. She didn't treat me like a patient or a paycheck. She scolded me, told me that all the money in the world wouldn't save me if I didn't learn how to live for something worth keeping." The way he said her name, softly, reverently, made my chest tighten. I could almost see her standing there beside his hospital bed, arms crossed, that half smile she gave when she was pretending to be stern. "She used to bring me books," he said. "Not the kind I was used to. Nothing about business or philosophy. Stories. Human stories. She said people who stopped reading about others eventually forgot how to feel. I didn't understand it then, but I do now." He paused, swirling the untouched drink in his glass. "She'd talk about her dreams while she changed my bandages, about wanting a family, a little girl, a garden with white roses. I thought she was too good for the world she lived in." A lump formed in my throat. That had been her, all her, a dreamer who believed in gentleness more than glory. Harrison's gaze turned distant. After I left the hospital, I tried to find her. I sent flowers, letters. Nothing came back. Then one day the nurses' station told me she'd resigned. No forwarding address, no explanation. It felt like losing a light I didn't know I needed. I swallowed hard. My palms pressed flat on my knees. "She never mentioned any of this, not once." He nodded, his voice quieter now. "Because that's who she was. She never wanted recognition. She didn't help people to be remembered. She helped them to remember themselves." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the city below felt far away, like another lifetime. I thought about all the nights she'd come home from the hospital smelling faintly of antiseptic and coffee. Her hair tied up, her eyes tired but still bright. I'd always asked how her day was, and she'd always smiled and said, "Someone needed a little kindness today." I'd never realized how much weight those words carried. "Mr. Walker," Harrison said finally, setting his glass down, "I owe my life, and everything I've built since, to your wife. Her compassion changed me. Every foundation I've created, every scholarship, every children's hospital under my company's name exists because of what she taught me." He looked at me then. Really looked. The kind of gaze that sees past what's visible. "She saved more lives than you'll ever know." I felt something shift inside me. Pride tangled with heartbreak. For years, I'd carried this quiet resentment, thinking she'd left me too soon, that she'd been taken before she'd truly lived. But sitting there in that glass tower, I realized she had lived, in every life she'd touched, in every small act of kindness that had rippled into something larger. "She never told me," I whispered. "Because that was her way," he said softly. "She didn't need the world to see her. She just needed to love it." I ran a hand through my hair, trying to breathe past the lump in my chest. "Why tell me all this now?" Harrison hesitated. Then he walked to his desk, opened the top drawer, and pulled something out. A small sealed envelope. My breath caught. The paper was yellowed slightly at the edges, the ink faint, but the handwriting was unmistakable. The looping E, the gentle curve of every letter. My wife's handwriting. "She left this for you," he said. "Years ago." I stared at him, unable to speak. "She gave it to me the day I left the hospital. Said I'd know when to give it back to the right man." I reached out, my hand trembling as he placed the envelope in my palm. The paper was warm from his hand, soft with time. "What does it say?" I whispered. He smiled sadly. "I don't know. I never opened it. She told me it wasn't mine to read." The room felt smaller suddenly, the light dimmer. Every sound, the hum of air vents, the distant horns outside, faded into nothing but the rustle of that paper between my fingers. I traced her name written in the corner. "To the man I'll love for the rest of my life." For years, I'd thought grief had stolen her voice from me forever. Now somehow she was speaking again, across time, across death, across everything that should have made it impossible. The billionaire's hand lingered on mine for a moment as he said softly, "She wanted you to have this when the time was right." The envelope in my hand bore her name, and her final secret. It was her handwriting, and somehow it still smelled like her perfume. I don't know how long I sat there in that glass office, staring at the envelope like it was alive. My fingers wouldn't move. My heart did, though. It thudded so hard I could hear it echo inside my ears. The handwriting was hers, The same looping cursive that used to mark birthday cards and grocery lists taped to our fridge. The same slanted E that had once signed love notes folded into Lily's lunchbox, and the faintest trace of her perfume clung to it, soft, floral, and hauntingly familiar. It had been years, but that scent still carried everything I'd ever loved and lost. My throat tightened. I looked at Harrison, who stood by the window, giving me space he didn't have to. His reflection was a dark silhouette against the city light. A man who had everything, yet still looked like he'd give it all to rewrite one day in his past. "Are you sure she gave this to you?" I asked, my voice low, almost trembling. He nodded. "She said I'd understand when the time came." The time came, I thought bitterly. Years too late. I turned the envelope over, tracing the faint ridges of her handwriting with my thumb. It was addressed simply, "To my husband, when he's ready." Ready for what? Forgiveness? Truth? Goodbye all over again? I didn't know. But I couldn't wait any longer. My hands shook as I broke the seal. The sound was small, almost reverent, like opening a prayer. The paper inside was yellowed with age, the ink slightly faded, but her handwriting flowed steady, graceful, untouched by time. I took a deep breath and began to read. "My love, if you're reading this, then life has taken me where you can't follow yet. I hope you waited a while before opening this, because that would mean you lived, really lived, and didn't spend your days in the shadows of what we lost. I can't tell you how sorry I am for the pain I've left behind. When I think of you, I don't see the man who cried beside my hospital bed. I see the man who made me laugh when we were broke and happy, the man who believed that love was enough even when the world said it wasn't. You were always enough. Please believe that. I never wanted to leave you carrying questions, but there's one truth I couldn't tell you then. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I didn't trust time. I made a promise once, a promise to a man who owes me nothing but gave me a piece of his humanity when mine was breaking. His name is Harrison Reed." I froze. The name bled off the page like a bruise. My pulse quickened, my vision blurring for a moment before I forced myself to keep reading. "Years ago, before you and I were married, I was a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital. You know that part. What you don't know is that there was a patient, a man, whose life hung on a thread. He'd nearly died in a crash. His body was broken, but his spirit was worse. He believed that life was a currency he'd already spent, that people only cared when they could buy something back. I remember thinking he looked like a man who'd lost faith in the world. And for reasons I still don't fully understand, I couldn't let that be the end of his story. I stayed late on his shifts, brought him breakfast when he refused to eat, told him stories about my childhood, the small-town dreams, the Sunday mornings, the sound of my mother humming in the kitchen. He used to say it was the only time the hospital didn't feel like a cage. When he was discharged, he left me a note that said, "You reminded me that kindness exists." That was the last I heard from him, until years later, when he sent a letter saying he'd built something good, in memory of the woman who once taught him how to start over. He didn't name me. He didn't have to. I knew. And that's when I made my promise. I blinked, tears stinging my eyes as the words blurred on the page. Her handwriting wavered slightly at the next paragraph, as if her hand had trembled while writing it. I promised him that if anything ever happened to me, I'd make sure he knew his life hadn't been wasted, that what he built mattered. You see, my love, we never really own our kindness. It moves through people, finds its way back in forms we can't predict. Harrison taught me that pain can grow into something beautiful if you let it. I wanted to tell you this in person, but I was afraid you'd think it meant something more than it was. It didn't. It was gratitude, pure and simple. But I also knew you. And I knew you'd never rest if I didn't leave you a way to understand the parts of me that didn't belong to our small world. That's why I'm writing this now. To tell you there was nothing I wanted more than the life we built. You and Lily were my whole heart. But if I ever inspired that man to do good, if my kindness helped him heal, then that too is part of our story. When you read this, I hope you'll find him. Tell him he kept his promise, and tell him I kept mine. Always yours, Emily. By the time I reached her name, the letters had blurred beneath my tears. The paper trembled in my hands, soft and damp, the ink smudging where my thumb had pressed too long. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I could only sit there, hearing her voice in my head, steady and calm, the same way she'd sound when reading bedtime stories to Lily. Except now, she was the one putting me to bed, tucking me into a peace I wasn't ready to feel. When I finally looked up, Harrison was still standing by the window, his head bowed slightly, as if giving me privacy to grieve. But I could see the emotion he was fighting to contain, the flicker of guilt, gratitude, and something else deeper, older. She kept her promise, I whispered. He turned toward me, his voice quiet. And now it's our turn. I looked back down at the letter. My wife's words, written from the grave, sealed by time, had tied two broken lives together. Hers and his. But one line lingered in my mind like a heartbeat I couldn't ignore. Tell him I kept my promise. I traced the edge of the paper again, noticing for the first time that there was something else inside the envelope. A small folded card tucked behind the letter. I pulled it out, my breath catching when I saw the handwriting on the front. It wasn't hers this time. It was his. Inside her envelope, behind her letter, was another note, written in the billionaire's handwriting, and beneath his name, 3 words that stopped my heart cold. The promise remains unfinished. She wrote, "If I can't return, tell him to take care of you both." I didn't understand. Until now. For a long time after I read her letter, neither of us spoke. The city outside was still humming, cars, sirens, life moving on. But inside that office, everything stood still. The air felt heavier, like grief had its own gravity. I sat there clutching the pages, her words still echoing in my head. If I can't return, tell him to take care of you both. I didn't understand what it meant. Not until I looked up and saw Harrison watching me with that same expression I'd seen the night my wife died. The look of someone who knew pain intimately and carried it like a second heartbeat. "She told you that?" I asked finally, my voice raw. He nodded slowly. "She said those exact words. The last time I saw her, she made me promise." The way he said it, steady, quiet, almost reverent, sent a chill through me. Promise what? He walked toward his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small box. Inside, I caught a glimpse of something gold, a delicate hospital bracelet, the kind patients wear with their names stamped in metal. He held it carefully, like something sacred. "This was hers," he said softly. "She left it behind the day I was discharged. I tried to return it, but she told me to keep it. Said it would remind me that I owed her a favor, one I'd someday have to repay." I felt my stomach twist. "What kind of favor?" He looked at me then. Really looked. "She told me that if anything ever happened to her, I was to find you, and your daughter, and make sure neither of you ever wanted for anything again." The room seemed to tilt. I stared at him, struggling to make sense of what I'd just heard. "She asked you to take care of us?" He nodded. "Yes. I thought she meant something simple, a gesture, a donation. But after her death, I couldn't find you. Every trace of her vanished after she left the hospital, until your letter arrived." I swallowed hard. "So that's why you reached out?" "That's why I had to," he said. His tone wasn't prideful. It was heavy, like a debt too long unpaid. "She saved my life. Not just physically, she saved who I was. I was angry, selfish, lost. She reminded me of the kind of man I wanted to be. When she asked me to take care of her family, I thought I'd never need to, but then—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I looked down at her letter again, my fingers tracing the edge of her signature. The reality of it hit me all at once. That even in her last days, she'd been thinking ahead, tying knots between lives she knew might never meet again. So, what now? I asked quietly. You're here to… what? Honor her promise? Yes, he said simply. I have the means to, and I intend to. I stared at him. By doing what? He took a breath, walked to the table, and placed a folder in front of me. Inside were papers, official, clean, crisp, the kind of documents that carried the weight of decisions too big for an ordinary man to hold. I've arranged a full scholarship fund in your daughter's name, he said. Her education, her future, everything she'll ever need, and a trust for you to make sure you can give her the life Emily wanted. I blinked at the numbers written across the pages. They didn't look real. The kind of money that could erase every worry I'd carried since the day Emily died. The kind that could fix everything. Except the thing I actually wanted fixed. I pushed the folder back across the table. I can't take this. He frowned, calm but confused. This isn't charity, Mr. Walker. It's a promise fulfilled. My voice cracked as I said it. No, it's pity. His jaw tightened, but his tone stayed level. You think this is about pity? You think I don't understand what it's like to lose everything? I stood up, my chair scraping hard against the polished floor. You don't understand what it's like to keep losing it every day. I wake up and she's still gone. I walk past her photos, her empty pillow, and it still hurts like it happened this morning. You think you can erase that with a check? He didn't flinch. He let me speak, let the anger tear its way out. When I finally stopped, breathless, he said quietly, No, I can't erase it. But she asked me to help you build something past it. His words hung in the air like smoke. I looked at him. At this man who had everything the world could offer and still looked hollow inside. You can't buy what I lost. I'm not trying to, he said. I'm trying to keep my word. The sincerity in his tone cut through the anger, but it didn't make the ache any less. I looked down at the folder again. The trust, the scholarships, the promises written in ink. It felt wrong, like putting a price tag on her love. She didn't do this so you could feel good about paying it back, I said. She helped you because that's who she was. I know, he said softly. That's why I'm doing this, because that's who she wanted me to be. For a moment, neither of us moved. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock behind him, each second stretching longer, heavier. I can't sell her memory, I said finally. His expression changed, not to anger but to understanding, maybe even admiration. Then don't think of it that way, he said. Think of it as keeping her faith alive. She believed in you, in your daughter. She wanted this. I shook my head. She wanted us to live, yes. But not like this. Not under someone else's shadow. Not under a debt that feels like guilt. The silence grew thick again. He studied me for a long time, the faintest flicker of something almost like sorrow in his eyes. You sound just like her, he said at last. She said the same thing to me once, that real kindness doesn't need repayment. I stared at the papers again, at the signature line waiting for my name. It felt like a crossroad, one road paved with security, the other with pride. And somewhere in the middle stood her ghost, watching both men she'd saved try to honor her in their own broken ways. When I finally spoke, my voice was barely a whisper. You made her a promise. But she made me one too, that we'd find our way on our own. I closed the folder and pushed it gently back toward him. I'm sorry, I said. I can't take it. He didn't argue this time. He just looked down, nodding once, as if accepting a truth he'd already known. I respect that, he said quietly. But understand something, Mr. Walker. My promise to her doesn't end here. I turned toward the window, watching the sun fall behind the skyline, the reflection of both our faces in the glass. Two men bound by the same woman, the same loss, and the same promise neither of us knew how to keep. He closed the folder, eyes steady on mine. If you won't let me keep the promise she asked for, he said softly, then I'll find another way. How do you thank a man for kindness that feels like guilt? The car ride home was silent. Not the peaceful kind the kind that hums with all the words you're not saying. Claire sat in the front seat, her posture perfect, her eyes never meeting mine in the rearview mirror. She must have sensed the tension pressing between the two men she worked for, one living in marble towers, the other in a crumbling apartment that still smelled faintly of the woman they both missed. When we reached my street, she said softly, "Mr. Reed asked me to tell you his offer remains open." I nodded, gripping the envelope in my hands. "Tell him I heard him." She hesitated, then added, "He only wants to honor her wish." "I know," I said, "but some wishes are meant to stay promises, not debts." Her eyes flickered with something like understanding before she stepped out and opened my door. The city air hit me like a wall, familiar, heavy, human. I climbed the stairs to our small apartment, every creak in the wood reminding me how fragile my world really was. Inside, Lily sat at the kitchen table, coloring. "You're late," she said, without looking up. "I know, Bug." I tried to sound normal. I poured her a glass of milk, avoiding the pile of bills stacked by the toaster. "Long day." "Did you talk to the fancy man?" she asked, her crayons scratching across the paper. I froze mid-step. "Where did you hear that?" "The lady in the suit told me," she said innocently. "She said he was your friend." Friend. The word felt wrong. There were many things Harrison Reed could be, a benefactor, a stranger, a ghost from my wife's past. But not that. "Yeah," I said finally. "Something like that." That night, after putting Lily to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table with the folder still unopened. The papers inside weren't just contracts. They were lifelines. Tuition paid in full, trust funds, security, everything a man like me should want. Everything Emily would have wanted for our daughter. And yet, staring at those numbers, I felt nothing but shame. I remembered her voice, soft but firm. "We'll build our own life, love. Even if it's small, it'll be ours." We had, brick by brick, until the storm took her away. Now another man was offering to rebuild it, not with love, but with money. I couldn't decide what hurt more, the need or the pride. I poured myself a drink and stared at the photo of Emily on the fridge, her smile caught mid-laughter, sunlight turning her hair gold. "What am I supposed to do?" I whispered. "You left me with a promise I don't know how to keep." The next morning I called Harrison. His assistant answered, polished and precise, and transferred me immediately. His voice came through calm and composed. "Mr. Walker?" "Mr. Reed," I said, "I need to see you." "Of course," he replied. "Same place?" "No. My place." A pause. Then, "I'll be there in an hour." When he arrived, his car looked painfully out of place on my street, all gloss and wealth against cracked pavement and chipped paint. He stepped inside, his expensive shoes squeaking faintly against the worn linoleum. His eyes drifted across the room, the faded curtains, the half-fixed lamp, Lily's drawings on the wall. "This is nice," he said carefully. I almost laughed. "You don't have to be polite. It's small. It's enough." He smiled faintly. Emily would have liked that. Hearing her name from his mouth felt strange, like a note played on the wrong instrument. I gestured for him to sit. "I thought about your offer," I said. He nodded. "And?" "I can't take it." His expression didn't change, but the air in the room shifted. "May I ask why?" "Because it's not mine," I said. "It's hers. You're doing this for her, not for me. And that makes it something I can't live with." "You think this is about guilt?" he asked quietly. "Isn't it?" I snapped. "You couldn't save her, so now you're trying to save what's left of her." The words came out harsher than I meant them, but he didn't flinch. He just looked down at his hands, fingers tightening. "Maybe you're right," he said finally. "Maybe part of it is guilt, but it's also gratitude. She gave me a second chance at life. And when someone gives you that, you don't repay it. You carry it. You honor it." I shook my head. "By throwing money at a man who loved her? You think that's honor?" "No," he said. I think it's the only way I know how to say thank you." His honesty disarmed me. The anger faded, leaving only exhaustion. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a check, folded once, crisp and simple. He slid it across the table toward me. "This isn't charity, Mr. Walker. It's trust. It's her belief that you and your daughter deserve better." I stared at it but didn't touch it. She already gave me better. I just didn't know how to keep it. He looked at me, eyes wet but steady. "Then let me help you keep what's left." Something in his tone, the sincerity, the ache, cracked the wall I'd built. For a second, I imagined saying yes. Imagined Lily's future, free from the worry that had haunted me since the day Emily died. But then I looked at her drawings taped on the wall. Stick figures holding hands under a sky full of scribbled stars. And I heard Emily's voice again. "Love isn't about who gives more. It's about who stays when there's nothing left to give." I pushed the check back across the table. "I'm sorry. I can't accept it. If I do, she's not mine anymore. Her memory becomes yours. And I can't sell her memory." He stared at me, silent for a long time. Then he nodded slowly, folding the check back into his jacket. "You're a proud man, Mr. Walker." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe I just know the difference between help and replacement." For the first time, a small smile flickered across his face. Sad, but real. "She said you were stubborn," he murmured. "She wasn't wrong." He stood, straightened his coat, and offered his hand. "If you ever change your mind, the offer stands. My door will always be open." I shook it, surprised at how steady my voice sounded when I said, "I won't." After he left, I stood by the window and watched his car disappear into the gray horizon. The street fell quiet again, but the silence felt different now. Heavier, lonelier. I thought that was the end of it. But later that evening, as the sun began to sink behind the trees, I took Lily to the cemetery. She carried a small bunch of daisies for her mother's grave. As we walked down the path, I stopped. A black car was parked at the far edge of the lot. Harrison stood there alone, head bowed, one hand resting on the marble stone that bore Emily's name. He wasn't speaking. He didn't have to. The wind caught his coat as he placed something small at the base of the grave, the gold hospital bracelet she'd once given him. Then, without looking back, he turned and walked away. From the distance, I watched him disappear through the cemetery gates. The man my wife had once saved, now saying goodbye to her in silence. And for the first time, I wondered if I'd just turned down the only man who still kept her promise alive. He stood at her grave longer than I ever had, like she was his ghost, too. I didn't mean to follow him. It was a coincidence or maybe something more. I don't know anymore. But when I saw that black car parked outside the cemetery the next morning, I pulled over without thinking. It was early, the sky still gray, the air heavy with that cool stillness only found in places where the dead sleep. The gates creaked when I pushed them open. His driver wasn't there. No security, no barrier between his world and mine. Just the billionaire and the silence of a graveyard. He stood by her stone, the same one I'd chosen years ago, plain marble with her name carved clean and simple. No angels, no flowers, just her words at the bottom. "To love is to live twice." He wasn't moving, just staring down, hands in his pockets, as if afraid to touch what time had already taken. I stopped a few rows away, hidden behind an old oak. Watching him there felt strange, like seeing grief reflected in another man's shape. He didn't look like the billionaire from the magazines anymore. The power, the posture, the polish, all of it gone. Just a man in a dark coat, talking softly to the ground. "I kept my promise, Emily," he said, his voice carrying just enough for me to hear. "But I wish I didn't have to." The words hit like stones. I shouldn't have listened. I knew that. But something in his tone, the rawness, the pain, held me there, silent, unmoving. "I found him," he continued. "He's stronger than he knows. Stubborn, like you said. And Lily, she's got your smile. the same stubborn light in her eyes. My throat closed. Hearing him say her name, our daughter's name, felt like being cut open and stitched back together at the same time. He knelt, his voice trembling now. "You asked me to take care of them, but I couldn't. He wouldn't let me. You were right about him. He doesn't want saving. He wants to do it himself. I respect that." He let out a shaky laugh, the kind that hurts more than tears. "You told me once that the hardest promises to keep are the ones that don't belong to us. You were right about that too." The silence stretched. A breeze passed through the trees, carrying the faint sound of the river nearby, the one we used to visit as a family. For a moment, I swear I could almost smell her perfume again, faint but real, like she was standing somewhere between us. He reached into his coat and took out something small, silver, glinting in the pale light. He turned it over in his fingers, studying it with a tenderness that didn't fit a man like him. "This," he said softly, "was for you. You told me to hold on to it until I found the right time. I guess this is it." He placed it carefully at the base of her stone, a small silver key attached to a faded ribbon. My breath caught. A key. To what? He brushed his hand across her name, the motion so gentle it felt like prayer. "You said there'd come a day when he'd need it more than I would. So, if you're listening, I've done what I can. The rest is his now." His voice broke on the last word. I didn't realize I was crying until the wind stung the tears on my face. There was something unbearably human about watching him there. The billionaire stripped of everything except sorrow. He stood slowly, took one last look at her name, then whispered something I couldn't quite hear. It sounded like thank you. He turned and walked toward the path, his footsteps soft on the gravel. I waited until he was almost gone before I stepped out from behind the tree. The key was still there. It looked old, the kind of key made for a door that no longer existed. Small, silver, with a faint engraving on the handle. I bent down and picked it up, the cold metal pressing against my palm. On one side, etched so faintly I almost missed it, were 3 letters. EGW, Emily Grace Walker. My chest tightened. She'd left it for me. Whatever this was, whatever it opened, it was hers. I looked up to see Harrison's car waiting by the gate, the door open. He turned once before stepping inside, his eyes finding mine across the distance. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. For the first time, there was no anger between us, just understanding. 2 men bound by the same woman, standing on opposite sides of her memory, realizing maybe this was what she'd wanted all along. Not forgiveness, but peace. The car door closed, and the sound echoed across the graveyard. I watched as it drove away, shrinking into a black dot against the morning light. The wind picked up again, rustling the grass around her grave. I traced her name on the stone with my fingertips and whispered, "What are you still trying to tell me?" The key caught the sunlight in my hand, its reflection flickering like a heartbeat. I slipped it into my pocket, unsure if I was keeping a secret or uncovering one. As I turned to leave, the key's edge pressed against my leg, sharp, deliberate, almost guiding. And I couldn't shake the feeling that Emily's story wasn't over yet. It wasn't just a key. It opened everything she'd planned for us. For 2 nights after finding that key, I couldn't sleep. It sat on my nightstand beside her picture, catching the moonlight like it was waiting. Like it had a story it refused to tell. I turned it over again and again, running my thumb along the engraved letters, EGW Emily Grace Walker, my wife's name. She'd left it for me, or for us. But why? By the 3rd morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I dropped Lily off at school, then drove without knowing where I was headed, the key burning cold in my pocket like it had a pulse of its own. Every mile took me farther from the city, past empty fields and quiet roads lined with pines. I didn't even realize where I was going until the GPS signal vanished and the road narrowed into gravel. And then I saw it. An old Victorian house, sagging under years of silence, its white paint faded into gray. The address on the rusted gate matched the tag that had come with the key. I stopped the car and just stared. The place looked forgotten, like it had once been alive, then simply decided to sleep forever. Vines crawled up the porch rails. The windows were clouded with dust. But even from the road, I could feel something familiar in it, like a scent you recognize from a dream. I climbed the steps, the wood creaking under my weight, and stood in front of the heavy oak door. My hands trembled as I slid the key into the lock. It turned easily. Too easily. When the door swung open, the smell hit me. Faint and sweet, like old paper and lavender. Her scent. The air inside was cool, untouched. Dust floated through the light spilling from cracked windows. The walls were lined with faded photographs and newspaper clippings, some yellowed with age. I stepped inside slowly, the floorboards groaning under each step. There were boxes stacked near the fireplace, labeled in her handwriting. My throat tightened. "Emily," I whispered. Her handwriting was everywhere, on sticky notes, on envelopes, on sketches tacked to the walls. It felt like walking into her mind. I picked up a notebook lying open on a desk near the window. The first page stopped me cold. Plans for Haven House, a place for families to start again. There were sketches of rooms, a kitchen, a reading corner, a garden. Notes about funding ideas, community events, volunteer lists. She'd been building something here. Something for others. My eyes burned as I read her words. For the people who lose everything, but still want to believe. A sound broke the silence, the faint creak of the front door. I turned sharply. Harrison stood there. He didn't look surprised to see me. Just tired, like he'd known I'd come. "So you found it," he said quietly. I nodded. "You knew about this place?" He stepped closer, his eyes scanning the room. "She showed it to me once, years ago, after the accident that almost killed me. She said it used to belong to her grandmother. Said one day she'd turn it into a home for people who'd lost theirs." I swallowed hard. "She never told me." "She didn't tell anyone," he said. "She wanted to finish it first. Then—" He stopped. The silence said the rest. I turned back to the desk. There was another box on the floor. Inside were photos. Emily with children, some I didn't recognize, others from the hospital where she worked. Smiling, alive, full of the light that used to fill every room she entered. At the bottom of the box was a leather-bound journal, its cover soft with age. I opened it carefully. Her handwriting danced across the pages, familiar, looping, beautiful. "If you're reading this, then I didn't make it." The words blurred as I blinked back tears. "I never wanted to leave you with pain. I wanted to leave you with purpose. Harrison and I talked for years about creating a place for families who lose everything. Not just a shelter, but a home for healing. He believed in it. So did I. But I couldn't do it alone. If you're here, maybe it means you're ready to finish what I started." I felt my chest tighten. She hadn't left us behind. She'd left us something to build. Harrison's voice broke the silence. "She asked me to fund it when the time came. I thought that meant after she retired. I didn't realize—" He trailed off, his voice cracking. We stood there for a long time, surrounded by her words. For the first time, it didn't feel like we were rivals. We were just two men standing in the shadow of the same love, both trying, in our own ways, to keep her alive. "She wanted us to do this together," I said softly. He nodded, his eyes glistening. "Yes. She said I'd know when it was time, that when you found the key, everything would make sense." I ran my hand over the desk, over her sketches, her lists, her unfinished dreams. The room felt alive again, as if she was still there, guiding us both toward what she'd always wanted. Not money, not comfort, but healing. "Then we finish it," I said. Harrison looked at me, and for the first time he smiled. Not like a billionaire, but like a man who'd finally found peace. "Together?" "Together." The word hung in the air, soft but certain. Outside, the wind shifted. A curtain lifted gently, letting in a ray of sunlight that landed across her journal, like a blessing. I turned to the last page, my heart pounding. There were no plans, no sketches, no lists. Just a few final words, written in her steady hand. "You'll find each other when it's time." I looked up from the page, the sunlight spilling between us, and realized she hadn't just left us a key to a house. She'd left us the key to forgiveness. She didn't leave us money. She left us a mission. The day we reopened Haven House, sunlight poured through the windows like a quiet benediction. The paint was still fresh, the scent of pine and new beginnings clinging to the air. The sound of children's laughter drifted through the halls, sharp, alive, healing. It had taken us months to get here. Months of long nights, buried paperwork, and small miracles. Harrison had handled the funding, the permits, the publicity. I'd handled the hands-on work, sanding floors, fixing lights, rebuilding walls with the same care I once used to hold Emily's hand when she was sick. We called it the Emily Grace Foundation, but to me, it would always be her dream breathing again. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was small. Just a handful of volunteers, a few families who'd already moved into the renovated rooms, and Lily standing beside me in a pale yellow dress her mother would have loved. When the applause faded, Harrison stepped forward. He looked different now, softer, calmer. The sharp lines of business had melted into something more human. He spoke with a voice that trembled not from nerves, but from gratitude. "Emily believed that healing didn't end in hospitals," he said. "She believed it began in the places we build for each other, in second chances, in hope, in love that refuses to die." I looked down at Lily, who was watching him with wide, shining eyes. She didn't fully understand what this place meant, but she could feel it, that hum of goodness her mother always carried. After the ceremony, as the guests wandered through the halls, I found Harrison standing in front of a framed photograph near the entrance, the same photo we'd both found in her diary box. It showed Emily, smiling in front of the old house before it ever became Haven. "She'd have been proud," I said quietly. He nodded. "Maybe. Or maybe she'd just tell us we're still not done yet." That sounded exactly like her. We stood there for a while, watching the children playing outside through the tall windows. There was peace in the air, fragile but real, and for the first time since her death, I didn't feel the ache of absence as much as the weight of continuation. Lily ran up to us, her face flushed with excitement. "Daddy, Mr. Reed, come see!" She pulled us both toward the courtyard. A group of children were painting a mural along the side wall. Blue skies, open hands, and words Emily used to say. "Kindness is the only thing that grows when you give it away." I felt my throat tighten. "She said that all the time," I murmured. Lily smiled. "I remember." Harrison crouched beside her, his eyes shining. "Your mom was a wise woman." "She was the best," Lily said simply. We stayed there until the sun began to set, the mural glowing gold in the fading light. For once, the silence between us wasn't heavy. It was full of gratitude, full of her. That night, after everyone left, Harrison and I stayed behind to lock up. The rooms felt different in the dark, softer somehow, as if the building itself was exhaling after a long life finally fulfilled. In her old office, now a reading room, her desk sat just as she'd left it. We'd turned it into a memorial corner, filled with her photos, her nursing pin, and the first letter that had started it all. I was about to switch off the lamp when I saw it. A small envelope tucked beneath the frame of her picture. It was sealed with the same pale blue wax she'd used on her letters, the same scent of lavender rising faintly from the paper. On the front, written in her looping handwriting, were 5 simple words. "For the both of you." My pulse quickened. I picked it up, staring at it under the dim light. Harrison stepped beside me, frowning softly. "What is it?" I turned the envelope so he could see. He froze. His expression shifted. Disbelief, Then something almost like fear. That's her writing. I nodded slowly. She left us one more letter. We stood in silence, both of us staring at it, both too afraid to break the seal. The air in the room thickened, the shadows stretching long across the walls. "I don't understand," I whispered. "How many of these did she write?" "Maybe just enough," he said quietly. "She always did like leaving messages for when the heart was ready." I ran my fingers along the edge of the seal. It felt fragile, like time itself was holding its breath. "Do we open it?" He looked at me for a long moment. "Not tonight. Not here." "Why?" "Because this," he said, gesturing around the room, "was her dream, that letter. That's her goodbye. And some goodbyes deserve to wait until the right morning." I didn't argue. He was right. We left the envelope on her desk, where the light from the window touched it gently, almost protectively. Before we walked out, I turned back one last time. The desk, the picture, the letter, all bathed in the soft glow of the moon. And for the first time, I didn't feel haunted. I felt watched over. Weeks later, the foundation flourished. Families found homes. Children laughed again. And Harrison, the man I once resented, became something closer to family. Every evening, Lily and I would walk through Haven's gardens, watering the plants she and her mother had once dreamed of planting. She'd tell me stories of her day, her laughter bright against the hum of cicadas. One night she asked, "Daddy, do you think Mom sees all this?" I looked at her, so much of Emily in that small, determined face, and smiled. "I think she sees everything." That same night, when I returned to the office, the moonlight fell across her desk again, and for the first time, the wax seal on the letter had cracked open all on its own. She always said love isn't about who stays, it's about who continues. The letter waited for weeks before we found the courage to open it. It sat on her old desk at Haven House, the pale blue wax cracked clean down the middle, as if time itself had decided it was ready. Harrison and I stood side by side, the morning sun spilling across the floorboards, catching flecks of dust that looked like slow-moving stars. Lily sat quietly on the windowsill, her knees tucked under her chin, watching us with that same steady calm her mother used to have. I took a deep breath and broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once, written in her familiar looping handwriting, neat, graceful, confident. My throat tightened as I began to read. "If you're both reading this, then it means you've already done what I prayed you would. You found each other." My voice caught, but Harrison nodded for me to keep going. "I know how hard forgiveness is. I know how much it costs to let go of pride and pain. But if you're here, then maybe you've finally realized what I always believed. Love isn't about who stays. It's about who continues. It's about who carries what we leave behind." I stopped again, blinking through the blur. Her voice, even on paper, felt alive, as if she were standing right there, whispering into the quiet. "Harrison, I told you once that you didn't owe me your life, but you owed yourself a second chance to live it fully. You've done that. You've turned your loss into something beautiful. Thank you for believing in me even when I wasn't there to remind you." Harrison turned his face slightly, but I saw the tear slide down anyway. He didn't wipe it away. "And to my love," I read, my voice trembling. "Thank you for never letting grief make you hard. Thank you for loving our daughter the way you loved me, completely. Don't ever think you failed me. You didn't. You simply carried me into the future." The paper shook in my hands. I had to pause, swallow, breathe. The room felt heavier, the silence full of things we couldn't say. "To both of you," it continued, "I leave this. Finish Haven together. Fill it with laughter, with life, with light. Let the children who walk its halls feel what we all once felt, love that asks for nothing but to be shared. If you can do that, then I'll never really be gone." By the time I reached the last line, the words had blurred completely. I handed the page to Harrison, unable to speak. He read the rest in a voice cracked and raw. "And when the day comes that you open the doors, stand together. because love was never mine alone. It was ours. He folded the letter slowly, reverently, and placed it back into its envelope. Then, without a word, he set it on the desk beside her photograph. For a long time, none of us moved. The sunlight shifted across the room, climbing higher on the wall, catching the gold edges of her frame. Finally, Harrison said softly, "She planned everything." I nodded. Even this moment. He looked at me, eyes red but steady. "Then we finish it right." The next months became a blur of motion and memory. We worked side by side, not as strangers, not as rivals, but as something closer to brothers, bound by grief, anchored by her. We hung her photographs on the walls, framed her letters in the hallway, built a memorial garden with Lily's help. Every brick, every nail, every touch felt like another way of saying thank you. When the last window was polished, when the final room was painted, we stood in the courtyard again, the same place we'd first seen the children paint her words on the wall. The mural was finished now. Across a sweep of blue sky and open hands were the words she'd once written in her journal. "To love is to live twice." Harrison placed a single white rose at the base of the mural and said quietly, "She was right." I looked at Lily, now 10, her hair catching the sunlight just like her mother's used to. She smiled at us both, proud, unburdened. "She'd like this," she said. "She would," I whispered. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't in so long. Peace. Not the absence of pain, but the acceptance of it. Years later, as the foundation finally opened to the public, Lily stood at the podium before a crowd of families, donors, and volunteers. Her voice was calm, clear, and strong. Her mother's voice reborn. "This place," she said, "was built from loss, but it stands for love. My mom taught us that the best way to keep someone alive is to keep what they believed in alive." The crowd fell silent, some crying softly. Behind her, the mural shimmered in the afternoon light, and for just a moment I could swear I saw Emily's reflection smiling in the window beside her. I thought her words were just for me. Turns out they were for everyone. The crowd that day stretched farther than I ever imagined. Rows of folding chairs lined the garden outside Haven House, the place that had once been a crumbling dream, and was now something alive, something radiant. The air was full of color and laughter. Children played under the oak trees. Volunteers shared stories of the people they'd helped. Banners fluttered with her name, the Emily Grace Foundation, for healing, for hope, for home. And standing there, watching it all, I felt something in my chest loosen, the final knot of grief I'd carried for years. Beside me, Harrison stood silent, hands clasped behind his back. His hair was streaked with gray now, his eyes softer, lighter. He didn't look like the man who had once ruled cities from glass towers. He looked like a man who had finally learned how to breathe again. When Lily stepped onto the small stage, the crowd went still. She was 17 now, taller, graceful, and carrying every bit of her mother's light. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm and steady, yet filled with emotion that silenced the morning breeze. "My mother believed," she began, "that kindness was the only thing strong enough to survive loss. She believed people could heal if they remembered how to give. And she proved that one life, one heart, can touch thousands if it beats for the right reason." I swallowed hard, trying not to show the tears burning behind my eyes. "She didn't build this place to be remembered," Lily continued. "She built it so others could start over, so they could remember that love doesn't end when life does. It continues, through every person we help, every family we shelter, every heart we heal." Harrison bowed his head slightly, his jaw tight, his eyes glistening. Lily smiled the way her mother used to, that quiet, knowing smile that said it's okay to cry now. "My dad once told me," she said, glancing toward me, "that grief is love with nowhere to go. But this place, this foundation, gave it somewhere to go." It turned pain into purpose. Applause rippled through the crowd, soft at first, then growing until it felt like the earth itself was clapping along. When the noise faded, Lily added one last line, her voice trembling just slightly. Mom's story began with loss, but it ended with love. I don't remember when I started crying, only that I wasn't alone. Harrison wiped his eyes, and even the reporters in the back lowered their cameras for a moment, as if realizing that capturing the moment might somehow cheapen it. After the ceremony, the three of us stood beneath the mural, the one painted years ago by the first children Haven ever sheltered. The same words stretched across the wall, brighter now under fresh paint. Kindness is the only thing that grows when you give it away. Harrison turned to me. You know, he said quietly, I used to think she saved my life, but now I think she gave it back to me in pieces, through you, through Lily, through this place. I smiled faintly. She gave it to all of us. He nodded. Then maybe this is what she meant by the promise being unfinished. We stood there for a while, the sun dipping low, painting the sky in the same soft gold that used to color her hair. The crowd had thinned, but the laughter still echoed across the courtyard. Children chasing each other between the rose bushes that Lily and I had planted in her memory. And for the first time since she'd left this world, I felt her everywhere, not in the ache of loss, but in the pulse of life all around us. That night, after everyone left, I sat in her old office, the same place where we'd once found her letters. The window was open, letting in the scent of spring and the faint sound of distant laughter. On her desk lay a fresh stack of paper and a pen. For years, I'd written letters to her I never sent. Words poured out into the silence because I didn't know where else to put them. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the silence didn't hurt. It listened. I picked up the pen and began to write. My dearest Emily, I used to think your story ended the day you left us, but I see now that it was only the beginning. Your kindness turned into walls that shelter the lost. Your words became the voice of a daughter who now carries your light. And the love you gave me, the kind that once broke me, became the force that built something bigger than either of us ever dreamed. You once said that love isn't about who stays, but who continues. We continued, Emily. We didn't just live, we grew. And I think that's what you wanted all along. Your story began with loss, but it ended with love. Always. The man you taught how to live again. I placed the letter in the same drawer where hers had once been, then looked up at her photo on the wall. She was smiling, caught mid-laughter, as if she already knew how it all would turn out. The wind moved gently through the open window, brushing past the papers, making them flutter like wings. And for one fleeting second, I could almost hear her voice in the air, soft, certain, and full of light. You kept your promise. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Leave a comment telling me which moment hit you the hardest. I read every one of them. Don't forget to subscribe for more real, soul-stirring stories that remind us what love truly means. Because sometimes, the right story finds us when we need it most.